Good evening to all the beautiful people tuning in. I'm here to help you sleep. Please support me by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'm also curious to know where you're watching from and at what time, so drop a comment below. Are you ready? Let's start with the first story.
The title of the story.
With one last groan, Elias collapsed to the floor. His body twitched spasmodically, as though some invisible force was pulling his limbs in unnatural directions. Clara ran to him, but before she could reach him, he suddenly sprang upright, his body jerking like a puppet on strings. "Clara, get out of the house!" Eric shouted from behind her, his voice filled with panic. She spun around to see Eric standing at the doorway to their bedroom, his face pale, eyes wide with terror. "There's more of them!" Clara turned back to Elias, but he was already gone. The house felt colder, the air thicker. And then she heard it, whispers, like voices calling from within the walls. Not just one voice, but many. With shaking hands, Clara ran outside. The moon hung high, casting a cold silver light over the village, where in the distance shadows moved like a living thing. Figures staggered out from the homes of the recently deceased, all of them wearing the same blank, vacant stare as Elias. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They moved like puppets, their limbs stiff and jerky, as though controlled by some unseen force. The dead weren't just coming back to life. They were being controlled. Clara's breath caught in her throat as she saw them all. Every corpse that had once been buried under the village cemetery was now walking the earth again. But they weren't confused. They weren't lost or disoriented. No, they were focused, driven by something far more sinister. "Get to the church!" Eric shouted, grabbing Clara's arm. They ran through the village, but with every step the whispers grew louder, the air thicker. The figures were getting closer. And then Clara heard a voice, one she hadn't expected. "Elias!" A voice called, though it was not from Elias himself. It was coming from deep within the earth, a dark presence, a force that had awakened the dead. Clara stopped, dead in her tracks, her blood running cold. She realized with a sinking horror what had happened. The illness that had taken so many had not been natural. It had been a curse, something ancient, something forgotten. And now the dead were rising, not just to return to life, but to fulfill a far darker purpose. With a final chilling sound of a door creaking open behind her, Clara turned to face the horror she had unwittingly awakened.
The corpse that woke up. The first time Clara heard it, she thought it was just the wind. The wind had a way of creaking the old wooden beams of their farmhouse, rattling the windows and making the floorboards groan under pressure. But tonight there was something different, something far more sinister. The sound, like a faint tapping on the door, continued for hours, disturbing her and her husband Eric. They had grown used to the village's eerie quiet ever since the plague began. People fell ill without warning, and no one was spared. It took months before anyone had the courage to speak of it openly, but by then it was too late. The village was dying, one household at a time. People whispered in hushed tones about the sickness, how it moved like wildfire, how it took the young and the old, and how it could strike even the healthiest person. But tonight, Clara's worry was not for the plague. It was for something far worse, something that crept beneath the veil of reality and twisted the very air around her.
"Eric," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do you hear that?"
Eric, half asleep, mumbled something incomprehensible before sighing deeply. "It's nothing, just the house settling, Clara." But Clara wasn't convinced. The tapping, like the sound of fingers dragging across wood, was too rhythmic, too deliberate. And then she heard it again, a soft, hollow whisper that seemed to echo from deep within the walls. Her heart skipped a beat. "Clara," Eric murmured, suddenly wide awake, "get back into bed. You're just imagining things." But she couldn't. The strange, unsettling sound seemed to come from the direction of the back door. She felt her feet move instinctively toward it, as if an invisible force was pulling her. Before she could reach the door, the whispers grew louder. Clara froze. The door creaked open slowly as if being pushed from the other side. In the moonlight that filtered through the window, she saw a figure standing in the doorway. A man, his clothes tattered and stained with dirt. He was barefoot, his skin pale and stretched tight over his bones, his face empty of all emotion. "Elias!" Clara gasped, her voice barely above a whisper. It was impossible. Elias had been dead for weeks, taken by the sickness that had spread like wildfire through the village. His funeral had been only days ago, his body sealed in a coffin, buried beneath the cold earth in the cemetery. But here he was, standing before her, his eyes fixed on her with a chilling, vacant stare. "Elias," Clara repeated, shaking her head, as though trying to awake herself from a terrible nightmare. He didn't answer. He simply stepped forward, dragging his feet across the floor with an unnatural jerking motion. The faint tapping sound came from his fingertips as they brushed the doorframe, leaving dark smudges on the wood. "Elias, no," Clara said, taking a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. You're dead." But Elias's blank stare never wavered. His head tilted slightly as if listening to something, his mouth opening to speak, but the only sound that escaped was a low, rasping breath. Clara backed away, fear beginning to coil in her stomach. She knew this was no miracle, no act of divine intervention. Something had brought Elias back, something unnatural, something terrible. The title of the story:
Resurrected for Revenge. The early autumn wind howled through the narrow streets of the small, sleepy town of Ashford, England. The sky had turned a bruised gray, thick clouds gathering to hide the dimming sun. Inside an old, creaky house on the outskirts, Emily paced back and forth, the hollow sound of her boots echoing off the worn floorboards. Her eyes, bloodshot from weeks of sleepless nights, were fixed on the empty chair where Eliza had once sat, her best friend now gone forever. Eliza had been found dead in her own home, Her lifeless body sprawled in a pool of blood. No one knew who had killed her or why. The police had called it a brutal, unsolved case, and though they'd searched for clues, no answers had come. The pain of her loss was still raw, but it was the strange occurrences that had begun to plague Emily's life that truly shook her to the core. The first night, it was nothing more than a slight noise in the hallway, soft, rhythmic footsteps. Emily had dismissed it as the house settling, the house creaking under the pressure of age. But the footsteps had continued, slow and deliberate, each one seeming to draw nearer. She had stood frozen in her bed, heart pounding, waiting for the moment when the steps would pass by her door, but they never did. It was just her grief, she told herself, just her mind playing tricks on her. Yet the whispers came the next night, low and soft, as if someone were standing right behind her, murmuring her name. Emily! Her heart raced, and she whipped around, but the room was empty. The house was empty, and yet the voice lingered in her ears. At first, she tried to ignore the oddities. Footsteps in the hall, a door creaking open when she was certain she had locked it. But each occurrence left her feeling more uneasy, more certain that something was terribly wrong. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of work, Emily returned home, exhausted. She closed the door behind her, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet house. The faint smell of vanilla and roses, a fragrance that Eliza had always worn, lingered in the air. Emily's pulse quickened, but she dismissed the feeling, brushing it off as a figment of her grief-stricken imagination. That's when it happened. A soft, subtle scraping sound drifted from upstairs, like something dragging across the wooden floor. Emily froze in place, her breath catching in her throat. She told herself it was nothing, just the house settling again, but she couldn't ignore the chill creeping down her spine, the way her skin prickled in anticipation. With a shaky breath, she made her way up the stairs, each step creaking under her weight. As she reached the top of the staircase, the noise stopped. And then the whispering began. "Emily, help me!" The voice was unmistakable. It was Eliza's voice. Emily felt the room closing in on her, the walls narrowing with every passing second. She swallowed hard and pushed the bedroom door open, half expecting to find her friend sitting there, waiting for her with a smile. But there was no one. The room was empty, save for the faint impression on the bed as if someone had recently lain there. But Eliza's scent still lingered, the familiar floral notes that had once brought comfort now choking her with fear. The whispers continued, growing louder now, filling the entire house. "Emily, they did it! They killed me!" The words sent a wave of nausea through her. Who? Who had killed her best friend? The police had never found answers, and Emily had pushed aside the growing suspicion that there was something more, something supernatural at play. But now, standing in the middle of the room, the realization hit her like a ton of bricks. Eliza wasn't just dead. She was trying to tell Emily something.
The inside of the house was musty, the air stale, as if it hadn't been touched in weeks. The floors creaked beneath his feet, every step amplified in the silence.
His eyes scanned the dim hallway, and his gaze settled on the stairs leading up to the second floor. The creaking seemed to come from above, as though someone or something was moving in the dark. He made his way to the living room, where the scent of decay grew stronger. It was almost unbearable. And then he saw it. The coffin. The small wooden box, once placed neatly in the center of the room, was now cracked open. The lid was ajar, and inside, the body of Mr. Warren was gone. Panic surged through Daniel's chest, his breath quickening. He stepped forward, his mind racing, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Had someone taken the body? Was it some sick joke? But then, as his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he noticed something else. The floor around the coffin was disturbed, as if something had been dragged across it. Scuff marks led toward the door, and as his gaze followed them, Daniel's stomach turned. The marks didn't stop at the door. They continued out into the yard, into the darkness beyond. Daniel backed away, his mind spiraling. He bolted from the house, his pulse racing. He didn't know what to believe anymore, but the evidence was undeniable. The dead had not stayed buried. In the following days, things grew even more bizarre. The village, once calm, began to whisper about sightings of Mr. Warren. People reported seeing him walking along the streets at night, his figure appearing at the edge of the woods at the foot of the church steps. It wasn't possible, Daniel told himself. Mr. Warren was dead. But the more people spoke of it, the harder it became to ignore. One evening, Daniel saw him. There, standing at the corner of the street, staring at the ground. Mr. Warren. But it wasn't right. His movements were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet on strings. His arms swung stiffly by his sides, and his head tilted at odd angles, as though something inside him was controlling his every motion. His eyes, once sharp and intelligent, were now vacant, blazed over, as if whatever had taken him had stripped him of his humanity. Daniel followed him, unable to tear his eyes away. The air grew colder as he walked, his heart thudding in his chest. He was drawn to the figure, a mix of fear and curiosity gnawing at him. The man, if it could still be called that, turned down an alley and disappeared into the night. The next morning, the village was alive with rumors. More people had seen Mr. Warren, walking, moving, acting as though he was alive. But something was off, something was terribly wrong. As Daniel dug deeper into the history of his old neighbor, he uncovered a horrifying truth. Mr. Warren had been involved in occult practices, rituals to prolong life, to cheat death. He had dabbled in things most people didn't dare to understand. It seemed that death had not claimed him completely. Something else had taken hold of him. Something dark, ancient, and malevolent. And then the true horror hit Daniel. The puppet master, the force that had reanimated Mr. Warren, was not some ancient entity from the past. It was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting to claim its next victim. One night, as Daniel sat in his room, he heard the unmistakable sound of creaking footsteps outside his window. His blood ran cold. The footsteps drew closer, slow and deliberate, just like Mr. Warren's unnatural gait. And then a voice, whispering in the dark, too soft to make out. Daniel stood, his heart hammering. He knew what had to be done. The strings were already tightening around him. He was no longer just a witness. He was the next puppet. And the final, chilling thought echoed in his mind. When you are controlled, you don't even know you're being moved.
The title of the story: The Undead Neighbor. The village of Larkwood was quiet, too quiet. Daniel had always loved the stillness, the simplicity of life in this tiny, forgotten corner of the world. The sort of place where people still greeted one another on the street, and the wind had stories to tell. But ever since the accident, the town had lost its charm. The once familiar hum of daily life had been replaced with a quiet unease, a constant chill that clung to the air like a fog. Daniel's neighbor, Mr. Warren, had been one of those quiet souls who preferred the company of books over people. He was a reclusive, elderly man, well respected in the village, though always distant. That was until the day the accident happened. His car veered off the road, slamming into a tree just outside the village. It was sudden, a tragic, random moment that shattered the peaceful monotony of the town. Mr. Warren was dead before anyone could reach him. Daniel had attended the funeral, though he hardly knew what to feel. It wasn't that Mr. Warren had been a bad neighbor, far from it, but their interactions had been few. Still, something about his absence, the way the village had seemed to hold its breath in the days following, had made Daniel uneasy. It was as though the town had lost its pulse. In the weeks that followed, Daniel tried to move on. He threw himself into his work, distracted by the small tasks that kept him busy. But at night, the stillness returned, and with it, the strange events that would shake him to his core. It started subtly at first, creaking footsteps coming from the old house next door, followed by the faint sound of something scraping against the walls. It was impossible to ignore, the sort of noise that felt too deliberate, too persistent. Daniel thought it was his mind playing tricks on him, grief and loneliness making him imagine things. But then came the smell. It was a foul, rancid odor, like something was rotting in the walls. At first, Daniel assumed it was just an old house settling, some issue with the plumbing, or perhaps something dead in the attic. But the smell persisted, thick and unmistakable, wafting through his own window at night. The air seemed to grow heavier, and even the moon seemed dimmer, as though the very light was reluctant to touch the house next door. The noises grew louder as well. The scraping turned into heavy thumps, as though something or someone was dragging themselves across the floor. It wasn't the wind, or so Daniel told himself. It was impossible to ignore. But still he hesitated.
What could he do? He was just a neighbor, and the man was dead. Perhaps he had imagined it all. One evening, unable to sleep, Daniel decided to investigate. His curiosity gnawed at him like a persistent itch, urging him to find out what was happening in the house next door. The moon was high, casting long shadows across the empty street, and a cold wind whispered through the branches of the trees. His footsteps were cautious as he walked up to the old house, its silhouette stark against the night sky. The building had once been charming and old Victorian, with ivy crawling up the walls and a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Now it looked hollow, its windows dark, lifeless. The door was ajar, creaking with the slightest movement of the wind. Daniel's heart hammered in his chest as he stepped closer. The faint whisper he had heard the night before seemed to echo now, as though something was beckoning him inside. His breath came in short bursts, the air thick with dread. But curiosity overpowered fear, and he pushed the door open.
She couldn't wait any longer. Emily needed answers, no matter the cost. The investigation was slow, dragging through the weeks with little progress. Emily combed through Eliza's personal effects, searching for any clues that might shed light on what had happened. But nothing stood out. Nothing made sense. Then she found the letter. It was hidden in the back of Eliza's journal, the pages folded and torn at the edges, as if it had been hastily stashed away. The words were frantic, disjointed. Eliza had written about a mysterious man she had met shortly before her death. He had seemed charming at first, but over time, Eliza had become increasingly uneasy. She had suspected him of being involved in something far darker than he let on, but she hadn't been able to prove it. The last few lines of the letter sent a chill through Emily's body. "They've been following me, watching me. I don't know how much longer I can hide." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced as she connected the dots. The mysterious man, the warnings Eliza had written about. It was all pointing to someone Emily had never considered before. Eliza's boyfriend, Jack. Jack had always seemed distant, aloof, but Emily had never suspected him of anything sinister. He was the one who had been with Eliza the night of her death. He was the one who had found her body, and he had been oddly insistent that the police stop investigating, offering little more than vague explanations and shallow condolences. Emily's gut told her something was wrong. That night, the whisperings returned, louder this time, frantic, almost desperate. "Emily, they're here." The sound of footsteps echoed through the house again, but this time they were not just outside her door, they were inside. The door to her bedroom creaked open, and there, in the dim light, stood Eliza. Her body was disfigured, pale and twisted. Her eyes were open wide, but there was no life behind them. And yet Emily could see her, feel her, standing there, staring at her with that insidious, unblinking gaze. "Eliza?" Emily whispered, her voice shaking. The ghostly figure didn't respond. Instead, it moved slowly towards Emily, dragging its lifeless body behind it. "He's here. He killed me."
Emily stumbled back, her heart pounding in her chest. The figure of Eliza's body lurched forward, then stopped abruptly. The air grew cold, and in the silence a new sound emerged. An unmistakable creaking from the floorboards. The floor in the hallway. The door to the room opened just enough to reveal Jack. But something was wrong. His face was pale, contorted in fear. His mouth was open, but no sound emerged. His body lurched forward, as if being controlled by some unseen force. And then, just as suddenly, he collapsed. His eyes wide, his body still. Emily gasped, and the whispers stopped. Eliza's body, her reanimated corpse, was no longer a shadow, a trick of the mind. It was real. Her spirit had not returned for peace or love. It had returned for vengeance. And Emily realized with a cold shudder that Eliza had never truly died, not in the way she had thought. The line between the living and the dead had been shattered, and Emily, caught in the middle, had no way out.